Thank you, everyone, for joining another episode of Intentwise Connect webinars. We're so excited to have Brent from AMZ Pathfinder joining us today, and we're going to dive deep into how AMZ Pathfinder has harnessed Amazon Marketing Cloud, and they're going to share some of the tips and tricks in terms of getting started with this new powerful platform and what you should look out for. But before we jump into that, I did want to give just a quick introduction of Intentwise in case you aren't familiar. Intentwise is a software provider in the Amazon and e-commerce space, and we have what we call our Intentwise e-commerce cloud of solutions. There are three solutions that we offer. One is our Intentwise Ad Optimizer, which helps you to manage bids at scale using automated rules and AI to manage all of your sponsored ads and DSP campaigns. Then we have Intentwise Analytics Cloud, which is a comprehensive Amazon and e-commerce data store and data pipeline. This product connects to all of the Amazon, Walmart, Instacart, and Criteo APIs and allows you to download and save all of your critical e-commerce data and connect it together so you have much more valuable insights into your business and do it automatically. And then lastly, we have Intentwise Explore, which is a solution built on top of Amazon Marketing Cloud, which allows you to accelerate value extraction from Amazon Marketing Cloud without the need to author SQL queries yourself, understand the outputs from AMC. All of that's handled in platform with the ability to also schedule query execution and audience creation. So we'll talk a little bit about how Intentwise Explore helps with AMC throughout today's presentation. But if you'd like to learn more about any of our products, feel free to visit our website and request to meet with our team. We'd be happy to give you a demo of any of these three products and show you how it can help you with your business. So with that out of the way, I am happy to introduce Brent and turn it over to him for the remainder of today's presentation. Brent, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And yeah, we're not going to get through this presentation without talking about Explore a couple times, so no worries there. Yeah, so here's the agenda for today. I'm going to start with a brief primer on what is AMC, because some people in the audience might not know, but we'll touch on that briefly. Where the data from AMC fits in to the larger Amazon data ecosystem and maybe the current kind of data ecosystem you have at your agency or service provider. How to talk about AMC to clients and some of the conversations that it opens up. Impact on ad strategy itself. This is like the biggest kind of meatiest part of the presentation because I get into examples and show data that's from our actual accounts. How AMC can help business growth. Yet again, so from a agency kind of perspective, although that's all these things are applicable for brands as well who are curious. And then the last thing is next steps to actually harness AMC, like what we've done in the past year to try to wrap our heads around this, because to be quite honest, it is a bit intimidating. But first, I think we got a poll. So let's run this.
All right, let me go ahead and launch the poll. We're curious to know if you're with us on Zoom, how many of you have run an AMC query before? It's a yes or no. This will help us gauge the level at which to present some of the content to you in today's webinar. So please just take a quick minute and answer that question. I'll leave this poll open. Brent, so far we're definitely skewing towards the audience have not run an AMC query before.
Okay. I can't see the results from my end, so I'm curious. I was placing some like internal bets on what it would be. 25%, 30%, 50. I don't know who the audience is, but yeah.
Yeah. So right now it looks like about 90% of the audience. I just went ahead and ended the poll. 90% of us have not run an AMC query before, so this will be fantastic learning experience for them.
Okay, good. That also means that the first section here is of key importance. So let's jump on over to that, and I'll explain it in great detail.
Absolutely.
If my keyboard works. There you go. Okay. So what is AMC? Amazon Marketing Cloud. It's been out for more than a year at this point. You've probably heard about it. You've definitely seen LinkedIn posts and maybe even previous webinars from Intentwise about it. But essentially, it's a privacy-safe database in the cloud provided by Amazon. And the way you extract data from it is SQL, or structured query language. It's not like programming, it's more like asking. It's like scripting. You're going to a database and saying, fetch these things for me, bring them back in such a way that I can make use of it. And then you pull that data out of there and use it how you see fit. What AMC does is it gathers all these signals from all the different Amazon marketing components that exist. So, the best way to think about it is like, we have your sponsored ads and you have DSP, and that's really the core of it. But actually, as Amazon expands their marketing ecosystem and moves up funnel and moves into streaming TV and Thursday Night Football and like a half dozen other things, all those signals are going to be eventually fed into AMC if they're not already. I think they have a bi-weekly release schedule. They're always coming out with new data sources. In addition to that, you can add your own inputs, which is not something I'll cover here because we haven't tried that yet. Or you can use paid data feeds. So you can actually pay to get some data pulled into AMC from Amazon about like customers that haven't been exposed to your ads versus those that have is like maybe the most common use case there. Another thing, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is my understanding of it. I've used it enough to have this, but there's something called user_ID or user ID. And this is a key in all these different databases and schemas that exist in AMC. And that is something that ties together all these tables. So this allows you to see user level events, so not user level data. Importantly, it's privacy here, right? You can't see someone's email and their phone number and such, but you can see user level events. So this user added to cart, this user saw this ad, this user 7 days later put it in their cart and checked out. Those are just basic examples.
Yeah. And that's spot on, Brent. And I think the user ID key, I'll just sort of reiterate why it's super, super important in this context, because a lot of these metrics you could get from individual reports before. And as we go into the schema explorer, I think you'll see some examples of like the DSP table and the sponsored ads table. These metrics have existed for a long time. The biggest difference and the biggest change in how AMC works is the fact that that user ID now exists, and it exists in every single table. So to your earlier point, that's how you connect these tables together to say, this user ID saw this one first, then this one second, and it's all done in a privacy safe way. You don't know who that user is, and you actually can't see, even at the user ID level, any particular individual user's path to purchase. They have to be aggregated in a way that it's maintaining that privacy across however many user IDs you're looking at.
That's a really good point about the aggregation. Yeah, but just to kind of drive home that point that Amazon's serious about the privacy here as they kind of position themselves as the company that's not having cookies that track you everywhere. Instead, they have things that are, safeguards in place to make sure that, your data is protected essentially.
Definitely.
So we actually just talked about this, Ryan. You just said the Schema Explorer. Well, this is my next screenshot. So here it is. Like if you go into, this is direct from AMC. On the left side, I'll have a screenshot of the full thing later, but this is like the data sources that are available. So under Amazon Ads, you have many, many different fields, and each of these expands into other fields. So like you said, DSP clicks, DSP impressions, conversions, one of my favorite ones to dig around in because you can see conversion data, and sponsored ads traffic, which is obviously hugely important for the discussions we're going to have here. But yeah, this is what it actually looks like. This is a graphic. Thank you, Intentwise. I love this one. So I asked if I could use it. But another thing to think about for AMC is it is the centerpiece of measurement, right? It's connecting the upper funnel and the lower funnel of advertising on Amazon. It's catching all these key events like add to wish list, add to cart, purchase. Some of these things are lost in other data sources and we don't have them. And as we've covered, this is this user ID that's tying these things together. So you can see this at an individual level or aggregate level, depending on the privacy related to it. I will say, like, from an agency perspective, I always felt that between DSP and sponsored ads, there was like this missing link. It's like there's an evolutionary step that we had somehow missed. And I know for a fact that has cost us clients and been a bit of a pain in the past, because we could never truly demonstrate to some clients, like, this is the real true impact of DSP. We know it's doing something, but we can't accurately measure and show it to you because we just don't have the tools. And when AMC first came out, I was a bit skeptical, but now I'm a believer, basically. To wrap up this section, so what is AMC? It really accomplishes two things: understand the customer journey at a very granular level, and then you can make highly targeted audiences that you can push into DSP and advertise to. What visualizations you create with this data is really up to you. So the actual files that come out of AMC are quite raw. I mean, they're just basically giant CSV files. And so that's on you to come up with visualizations or stick it in a database and address it with a tool. Or you can do what we do, which is work with Intentwise Explorer, which is what we use for a lot of the visualizations, which are the things you're going to see screenshots of later in this same presentation. So that's an important thing to realize, that the output is still fairly raw.
Yeah, and in our past sessions, I'll just add to that, Brent. One of the biggest challenges that we've heard from our customers and past attendees of AMC webinars is that understanding the outputs is one of the hardest things. But there are really three steps to it. One is understanding how to frame the query itself, how to run the query through AMC, and then how to visualize that output. And if you think about it in those three steps, those are the people, processes, and tools that you might need in order to get the most out of AMC.
I like that. I like those three steps. Okay, so next thing here, and yet again, this is from my perspective as an agency owner and founder. So when I heard about AMC, honestly, I rolled my eyes the first time. I was like, oh God, another acronym that I have to remember: AMS, AMC, DSP, SP, all this stuff. And then I realized shortly thereafter, oh wait, this is how we're going to make that connective tissue between DSP and sponsored ads. And then I got excited. And as Amazon expands their advertising reach and they have more places, the information that I'm covering here is only like really a small fraction of what is going to be possible with this in the future. So you're yet again limited only by your imagination, what kind of data you have available, and what kind of ads you're running, because whatever data they throw off is what you can obviously examine inside of this. So where does AMC data kind of fit in? The quantity of data that comes out of it is at first quite overwhelming. And there are some technical challenges to kind of onboarding and ramping up with what comes out of it. So the way that I have found to make this more approachable for myself and my team is start with business needs based questions and kind of work backward from there. That makes it much more approachable. So instead of jumping into that schema I showed in like slide 5 and just saying, wow, there's 20 different tables I can look at just for DSP, where do I start? You should instead ask yourself questions that you have about client accounts, or that clients have about their own accounts that they've brought up to you many times in the past. And you said, man, we're going to try to puzzle out a solution for this, but we can't really get it 100% right. Well, AMC might actually be the key to figure that stuff out now because, well, we have a much greater breadth of data available. And one other thing I think I didn't understand or appreciate in the early days of AMC, getting familiar with it, it's actually not a reporting tool. It's really a data exploration tool and an answering specific business questions tool, like I just alluded to. Those are the two things that I've learned are best. Not so much reporting week to week, month to month, but saying, what is the specific question we have about how DSP interacts with our sponsored ads? Or what is the life cycle of a customer? How long do they take before they like purchase something? So you have to frame the questions for it. Actually, here are some of these questions. How long does it take for a customer to purchase after first seeing one of our campaigns? That's a great question to ask. What ASINs are introducing customers to our brand and then resulting in further sales down the line? Those are some really good, solid business questions. And these are two of the ones we've been pursuing with AMC as well. So what it actually looks like, here it is. We talked about those data points, and those are yet again on the left side of the screen here. But this is a screenshot of basically just like a instructional query with some modifications that we made. And this is how you actually query it. You put in the SQL in the box there on the right, you run it. Amazon puts it in a queue. It takes a little bit. You get some feedback if it works or not. Depending on how big your data set is, it could take a while. But here it is. It's pretty raw. What we kind of prefer to do these days is to use Intentwise Explorer, because here we have a query library. We can actually dive in and we can say, okay, here are the use cases. These are the business-based questions that I alluded to earlier. And these are framed as something you can add to your list of queries. And then the same process will take place. It just runs through the API instead of through the interface like that. And they're batched and then they're run and you get the results and you can download them or you can visualize them depending on what they are. If you have a custom query, you can also ask Intentwise to make it. We do both. I think we've had you guys make some, but we've also run some of our own customs. So we're kind of splitting the difference and trying everything.
That's right. And the custom queries is really important too, because as you've mentioned, Brent, that's really where the true value of AMC shines, is when you have a very specific question unique to your business. And so the instructional queries oftentimes might get you like 80% of the way there, but really customizing those queries in a way that it's very specific to your business, how you're going to get the most out of it, whether that means you write it yourself or you work with a provider like Intentwise. That's the best path forward. So starting with those business questions and then framing the right query to go get that insight for you is how you should be thinking about it.
And actually another way to think about the queries, Ryan, I don't know if you've tried this, but I was talking about AMC with a friend who also is an agency operator owner last week, and they said, wouldn't SQL just be a problem for ChatGPT to solve? I thought, oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I guess. I mean, I've never tried that, but I guess if you fed it enough information about what the data structure looks like and how it should write them, it might be able to do that for you. I haven't tried that myself, but that could be another way to do it as well.
I think we've actually explored it. It's yes, there's challenges because the other thing with AMC SQL is you need to know not just SQL itself and like the way to write structured query language, but you also need to know the specifics around Amazon's schema and what they call metrics and certain naming conventions they have. And there are some limitations, but definitely in theory, something like ChatGPT, at least in the future, could write these queries. And what's interesting is, and we'll certainly have more news around this in the future, but we're building some very exciting features within Intentwise Explorer to allow you to actually modify the SQL code behind the scenes, but without needing to write that code yourself, meaning you can work with an interface with sliders and with dropdowns like you see here. That's actually going to be changing the SQL code that happens behind the scenes. So lots of different ways that you can actually interact with SQL. And I think certainly with the advance of ChatGPT and other LLMs, we're going to see that this can be improved even further.
Okay, that's really cool because this is the last part I was going to show about the interface, but it's just to give the audience an idea. I mean, compare this to the what we just looked at in the actual native interface itself. Obviously, I've blurred some parts here for customer client privacy, but this is a multi-touch attribution analysis we wanted to run. Let's set it up to go weekly, look at last 120 days, merely an example. You can exclude some things. You can add an instance. And one important thing to note about instances is each client or account you have a AMC instance with is its own contained thing. This isn't like Amazon DSP where you get DSP and then, you can run 20 different client accounts under it. These things are separated and segmented to the highest degree. So there's no kind of cross-contamination. That's why they call it a data clean room. So you have to select an individual instance to run it in, or you can do it in multiple, but the data between them will not mix. There's no way that it's going to merge with each other. So this is what it looks like. We hit save, we run it. There you go. Everyone's happy. And thanks for the little preview there, Ryan. I like that.
Definitely.
So, keeping this agency mindset, let's think a bit more about this. Client communication, like what is client communication at the end of the day for us? It's a lot of education. Education is one of the foundations of working with clients in a client-based business like an agency. So what can AMC bring to the table for us to help us here? Well, a couple of things. It's spawned a lot of interesting in-depth conversations that we've had with clients about education on, sorry, I had a window pop up there. Education on display advertising and programmatic advertising in general. So a lot of them are not, I would say, sufficiently educated on how display works. Like, what kind of metrics are we looking for? What is the importance of those metrics? Which things are we targeting when we're trying to build campaigns that are CPM based versus CPC based, which is what most people are familiar with. And a lot of the stats and information we can pull out of AMC helps us in those conversations because it gives us ammunition and actual data for those conversations. Incrementality is another one that's quite new to a lot of people. So we've had NTB or new to brand stats for sponsored brands for quite some time. But to my knowledge, the only place we can get new to brand stats for sponsored products, which for the majority of our clients is still most of their ad spend, I would say anywhere from 75 to 85% of their monthly ad spend is probably sponsored products. We can actually get new to brand data from AMC for that ad type, which is a big deal. And that allows us to run different reports, one of which I'll show later. And then we can help them understand what incrementality really means, which is, how often are we getting new customers in the door and how are we growing market share? How are we growing exposure to new shoppers, new customers? Another one, this is my favorite personally, is the myths and beliefs debunking. So here's like a myth I just posited here. Retargeting is the main thing I want to focus on with DSP. Well, retargeting is nice. It looks really cool in LinkedIn screenshots because you have a 10x ROAS, but ultimately you just got 3,000 people you're talking to. You're not actually doing anything to expand market share, push into competitors' market, or reach new customers like where they are with like a push style display advertising higher in the funnel. So now we have some data to actually back that up with AMC. Another belief, DSP has no impact on my business. No, we can actually tell you exactly what it can do now. because we have the data. And then the last one, shoppers click an ad and check out 5 minutes later. I think a lot of people who run Amazon businesses, they have a let's call it a mental model of how people interact with advertising, which is basically, oh yeah, people shop in the mobile app, they click sponsored products, they add it to cart, they add 1 or 2 other accessories, and then they check out within 10 minutes. That's how 100% of people shop. When in reality, it could be any further from the truth. Some of the data that we've pulled up with clients who are using AMC, have a sufficient amount of ad spend for us to really sink our teeth into, has been really enlightening to see how long these purchases take. I'll dig into some of that data in a slide here, not too long, but these are some of my favorite things to debunk or discuss. And so having AMC is a whole other thing for us to discuss with clients. And some of them are very, very curious about the data that comes out of it. Even though not all that data is necessarily actionable, they like to know it and they like to see it. And of course, we on the agency side are nerds. We like to look at it and know about it too. Okay, so impact on strategy. This is the part of the presentation, as I mentioned in the agenda, that's really where the rubber meets the road, where we're going to get into a lot of the specifics and data examples. So this is what it can actually help us do, right? What can AMC help us do? Yet again, puzzling out answers to long-standing business questions. I always try to think about it from that perspective. And these are examples from our data and how we use them. Ryan, I'd be totally happy with your help on some of these. I understand the structure of all of them quite well, but your perspective is so different from mine on the tool side. And I think you've studied this even more than I have. So I really welcome your input here to make sure the attendees get the full experience.
Definitely.
So the first one here, I'll start with probably one of the most popular, multi-touch analysis. So the model that we're all used to on Amazon is last touch attribution. So basically, let's say someone searches, they do something with some ads, they look at some other ads, they do this, they do that, but then they click on a sponsored product campaign and they buy, and that one gets all the credit. Well, those other 2 or 3 things that happened before don't receive any of the credit in Amazon's model for the most part. So this attribution evaluation method that AMC provides allows us to understand where the credit goes in multiple ways. So to use the example I have on screen here, this is from a real client account. Here's the ad spend, the first touch revenue. So if we're attributing all the credit to the first touch of advertising, the last touch, if we're attributing all of it to the last touch, and then linear touch, which basically gives equal credit to each stage of the funnel. And then we have ROAS for the different 3 methods too.
Yeah.
So this is understanding the interaction model within the Amazon ad ecosystem, right?
And the only thing I'll add to this, because you nailed it, Brent, this is really helpful in terms of figuring out what impact some of those other higher funnel, or even they could be lower in the funnel too, touch points might have on your customer's ultimate decision to purchase the product. And what's really interesting too is not every account will have what we call a multi-touch environment. It's very specific to the campaigns you're running and how those campaigns are reaching your audiences. And in fact, if we look at this example here on the screen, the way that you could evaluate whether you have a multi-touch environment is to see if there's big differences in the way that these campaigns are performing. And so when looking at this example, you'll see between first touch revenue and last touch revenue, and even linear touch, and then ROAS for each of those, there's not a huge difference. There's a little bit of a difference on sponsored display, but there's probably not a ton of multi-touch happening in this particular account. And so looking at the results from these campaigns with a different attribution model isn't necessarily going to change the decisions you make. However, if you were spending 10 times the amount on DSP, then we would probably see very different results here, where DSP now all of a sudden looks like the ROAS is much stronger on a linear touch model versus the last touch. And so if you're thinking about this and how you would run the multi-touch analysis for your brand, start by running the report and see how big are those differences between first touch, last touch, and linear touch. And if there are big differences, then maybe this is something that you need to explore further in terms of how those campaigns are all working together.
Right. It's a good point, because actually for this particular account, maybe I should use one of the others. The differences aren't really that stark, but
that's important. I think this is actually a good example of what you should identify as being not in a multi-touch environment. And that's an analysis that most brands need to do because you've never been able to do this before. And so, especially if you're already running those upper funnel campaigns, definitely like one of the first things you should do is run this report. And if you see something that looks very similar to this, then great, there's no issue and you can move on. But if there are differences in that ROAS and performance, then there might be additional actions we would recommend you take.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should use the wider time range, but this is a pretty good amount of spend overall. I think you're right though. We have clients that spend more on DSP than that number, and it does look different specifically for first touch, which you would assume would be higher in a lot of cases for DSP. Anyway, so this is one such example, maybe one of my favorites. Next one here, revenue and spend by path. So this is trying to understand the dynamic between what path customers take and if they're repeat customers or they're new customers, right? So this is a bit to chew on here, but the graphs, the graph here, the bars that are blue, dark blue, that's new to brand revenue, whereas the lighter blue is repeat customer revenue. So what it's saying is the vast majority of people that come in on sponsored products, and the first graph there are new to brand revenue. Whereas if you look at the right side of the scale, those that lead with DSP and then are shown sponsored products and then see a sponsored brand and then see SD, a lot of those are repeat customers. And that's to be expected because for this particular account, I know which account this is attached to. We've spent a lot of money on remarketing for DSP, and then we're like scaling up from that point. So it stands to reason that why DSP has such a good ROAS, which yet again is reaching out to a smaller pool of people. And it's mostly, as we can see, repeat customer revenue. And that total spend is far lower than it is on the left side of the graph, where we're looking at people that came in just sponsored products or had a sequence of events like sponsored products, sponsored brand, sponsored display, that 1, 2, 3 hit combo. And then what new to brand revenue those are. And this is very aggregate data too. Like Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we could do this at the campaign level too. We could drill down to a much further refined thing when we could see, oh, okay, what campaigns are really the ones that are responsible for new to brand instead of this top level like helicopter view we're doing right here.
Yeah, and in fact, we got a question on the previous slide, very similar. Like, can multi-touch analysis be run by ASIN at the ASIN level instead of at the entire account level? And the answer to both of these questions is yes. Again, this is the power of AMC, is where the instructional query might look something like this, where it's pretty high level and it's just showing you by all the different paths or just across your entire account. But if you modify those instructional queries with your own logic, whether that's certain ASINs that you want to see multi-touch analysis for, or whether it's certain campaigns where you want to see the revenue and spend by path, you can do that. But that's also where the complexity in AMC gets tricky, right? Is where in order for the output to be at the campaign level or at the ASIN level, or whichever level you would like, the actual SQL query has to be written at that level. And so many of the instructional queries that you see from Amazon are not that granular, and they would need to be modified with specific campaign names, ASINs, or keywords that you want to see reflected in the output.
Right. And Ryan, let me ask you this, because I don't think we've tried this, but we thought about it. Keyword level, is it possible at the keyword level to do new to brand? I believe it is with sponsored products.
Yeah, and this would be a massive output to try to deal with.
That's why we haven't done it, maybe.
Yeah. But this is something that, like, with the help, I don't want to do a shameless plug here for Intentwise Explorer, but I'm going to do it anyways. Where we are able to take a lot of that metadata that would create what would otherwise be a very, very complicated output with like thousands or millions of rows potentially in Excel, and turn it into a visualization just like this at the keyword level, at the campaign level, at the ASIN level. We can handle all of that technical metadata and the connection of writing that query on the back end. If you wanted to do it manually, it's very possible, but visualizing that output would be a challenge for sure.
Right. I think that's probably one of the structural reasons we just haven't tried that particular one. But I know from looking at the data and talking to my team who's certified and more into this, like, it is possible to do that. It's an incredible thing to think about.
It is. Yeah, but yet again, at the keyword level, you can literally say, build me an audience or a group of people who have searched this keyword and not seen my ad. Like, that's very
Ryan, no spoilers for my DSP thing later. Well, we'll go on to the next one because we got a couple to burn through here. But okay, so here's another one. Unique reach. What we're trying to do here is understand in this sequence of ad exposure, in the different media types, how much revenue is generated versus how much reach. So you can see people who just have bought from sponsored products, their revenue is actually not that great, but the reach is massive, right? We're reaching a huge number of people. In the first row here, the data. But if you go all the way to the bottom, this sequence, DSP, sponsored brands, sponsored display, sponsored products as the finishing touch there, that's a huge portion of our revenue, along with the other two that are DSP led. Yet the reach of it is actually, tiny compared to the reach of sponsored products. So this is one of my other favorite ones. Obviously, I'm just showing some of my favorites here in the slides, but this is, to me, making a case for what I would call like channel saturation, right? You want to run multiple types of campaigns to reach the same people, because what we're seeing is that sponsored products doesn't really ensure like as much revenue if you just run it by itself. It just looks like it does because historically it has got a lot of the credit for advertising being at the end of the funnel, because that's the last touch attribution that we all know and has existed in Amazon for a long time.
Definitely. I don't have much to add here. I think you nailed it, Brent, in terms of, Amazon likes to say all of their ad products work better together. And I think this is one very clear way to see that. Running one ad type at a time is not the most effective way to do it. When you combine these ad types, you're going to reach customers at different parts of their researching and searching journey. And that's why it's effective to run multiple different types of campaigns at the same time for the same products. You can see the results.
Yeah, and yet again, this is real live data from our accounts. These are fairly simple queries that are taken at a high level for the purposes of, instruction on the team and also this presentation. But I think it still illustrates it pretty well, between these different exposure groups, whatever that sequence would be called technically, I'm not sure. And then I have two here that are timed to conversions. I have two examples because they're two different accounts. And this one, like I'll flip between them a little bit so we can kind of show them off. But this explains the usefulness of DSP and just advertising in general, display advertising, something that entails like a longer decision-making time window. So this first one here, you can see a lot of the sales that are like DSP related, and the third biggest in the series of overall purchases here is 1 to 7 days. There's still a large number of people that do 1 to 10 minutes. And then one of my favorite categories, less than 1 minute. These people are lightning checkout people here. But then, that 1 to 7 days category is massive. And then 7+ days is right there next to it. So a lot of people are taking a week or more than a week to actually jump in and make the purchase. And this shows it. Now on the next slide, this is a very different account with very different products that are much cheaper. You can see the vast majority there is the 1 to 10 minute, but that 1 to 7 days is still there. 7+ days is much further to the right, which means, of course, less purchases overall as a portion of the whole. But a lot of people are still taking multiple days, within that 7-day period to make a purchasing decision. And the price point for the products in this account is far lower than the price point for the other one. So just to show you how different these two things can be, I think the contrast and the distinction between them is what makes this kind of interesting, which is why I keep flipping back and forth. But this debunks that myth that I talked about earlier, where the client's mental model for how people interact with ads is the way that they do it, which is I shop for something, I add it to my cart. Within 10 minutes, I check out. I would fall into that first category, which is admittedly how a lot of people do it, as we see here. But actually, there's a lot of people that take 7+ days. I don't know, Ryan, are there any other longer time frames that we don't even have on the chart here? Is there like 14+ days or like 30 days? I don't even know.
You can go up to 30 days, I believe.
Okay.
If you write the query that way. And so like if you're selling, Rolex watches or something, maybe it is 30 days or a decent portion of it is. And we've seen that too, especially with higher price point items, like in the jewelry category. A significant portion of the sales definitely happen after 7 days. So it's really interesting. And this is true with a lot of the insights you can get out of AMC. And it's why we keep reiterating that point of like the unique business questions are really where you're going to get the value. The results are always going to be very unique to your business. You see these charts maybe shared online or on LinkedIn, other webinars. It might look the same every time, but the insights that you can get are so uniquely specific to your business. That's why AMC is very powerful. It's this time to conversion slide. Brent's not going to run this for 5 of his clients and assume it's the same for the next 5, right? Everyone's going to have a very different and unique insight to pull out of AMC. And this can inform a lot of decisions that you might make with your advertising strategy and how long you retarget people after that initial view of your product or your ad.
Right. That's the question that I was kind of posing at the beginning, is like what can I actually do with this? So in this one in particular, I would say, well, obviously DSP is contributing a lot to our 1 to 7 day time window here. We should probably maintain that. And then we can write further queries in this and look at our campaigns individually, or look at individual efforts and figure out which ones are the ones that actually are hitting that like longer time window. So there's more like drilling into this that needs to continue. This is like the top layer, right? We're going to go to the next level of the soil as we continue to dig. But this is the starting point that would help us get there.
Amazing.
Okay, cool. So there's those two. And then I believe this is the second last one. Then we got the audiences, but incrementality. This one is actually not our data, but thank you, Intentwise, for sending this one over. But basically the idea here is, how are we using this? Which of these shares of revenue are from sponsored products versus sponsored display when it comes to new to brand revenue? So how many users are new to our brand? And this is in the last 13 months, I believe. New to brand is still quantified as with Amazon's time frame. What percentage of them from which campaigns and which ad types are new to brand? And how can we accelerate more of those if that's what we're after, if we're trying to gain market share? How do we push on those? And as we talked about earlier, Ryan, you can even do this at the keyword level. It's technically possible, although it might be somewhat difficult. So that allows you to say, well, we know this keyword, this particular keyword is giving us 60% new to brand. So why don't we just continue to pour a budget into that? And maybe the ACOS or ROAS is not the best, but we know that that's driving new customers within inside the Amazon ecosystem. So that's like the metric that we're using to judge this as a success or failure. We've been using this for sponsored brands for quite a while, but now we have the ability, the option to do this with sponsored products, which, as I mentioned and is shown in this graph too, is like the largest amount of revenue for sure.
Yeah, and certainly across even Intentwise's customers as well, sponsored products remains to be the top ad type in terms of spend. So if you fall into that group, which you likely do if you're an advertiser on this webinar, getting access to that new to brand metrics for sponsored products is just very helpful in completing the picture of what is your ad strategy doing to bring in new customers and ensuring that you're not spending more than you'd like to reach the same customers who've already purchased from you. So starting at this high level is great. And then, as Brent mentioned, getting down into the campaign and keyword level even to see very granularly where you're bringing in and having success bringing in new to brand customers is the value here.
Yeah. Well said. Not my favorite chart. I like the other ones more, but this one's pretty good too. Because I can't, and not all of them can be my favorite.
That's right.
And here's the last one here: impact on strategy, DSP audience building. We just built a very simple audience here. That's basically, customers that have shown interest in your product by viewing the detail page but haven't checked out. That's a very basic DSP query. I think the most exciting one that you touched on earlier, Ryan, is like people that searched, right? So they put in a keyword and maybe they impressed upon your ad, they saw your ad, but they didn't click, right? So these are lower funnel. Obviously there's intent there. You can probably mix that up with timing. So did they do it a week ago? Did they do it yesterday? And then you can basically create that audience and export that and pass it over to DSP, because when you have AMC, obviously your DSP instance is linked with it, and you can say, all right, export this, move it over. And then when you go into DSP, you'll see that as an audience you can actually target, which is really exciting. I don't think that was a capability we ever had before. Same thing with adding to wish list or a gift list. So those are some of those other signals that have been lost until more recently. You can target them in Amazon DSP after that. And then under or overexposed audiences. And remember, you can pull these audiences into DSP and you can exclude them. You don't necessarily have to target them only. You can actually say, no, I don't want to talk to these people. So if someone's seen my ad 14 times and we have data from AMC to say, well, actually there's diminishing returns after the 12th time and we don't really want to talk to those people again because they've already seen the ads so many times. Let's not waste our money. Let's not waste our impressions on them. Let's instead exclude them instead of including them. We build an audience for that, and we say exclude, not include. And then we tighten up our targeting there a little bit.
Yeah, the audience creation functionality of AMC is definitely, I think, one of the strongest points of AMC. If you think about all of the events that we just walked through and all the signals that Brent has shown us are in AMC, think about the way that audience creation works is you're able to craft any query you'd like and get the result will be a list of user IDs who meet that criteria. So whether it's, they saw impressions and didn't click, or they did click but they didn't buy, whatever the case may be, if it's one of those signals and you can query who those user IDs would be that meet that criteria, that's an audience on its own. So the possibilities are truly endless in terms of how you set this up. The only limitation that you should be aware of is that the audience does need to be at least 2,000 user IDs, otherwise it will fail. Again, this is going back to Amazon's privacy protections. And so there are different aggregation thresholds, but to create an audience, that number is 2,000. So as long as there's 2,000 user IDs who meet the qualifications that you've set up in your SQL query, you'll be able to do this. And this is truly where the insight, and like you said, the rubber meets the road, right? The insights lead to actual next steps, actions that you can take within your advertising.
Right, because AMC has so much fun stuff in it. We could all spend all day staring at it, but to actually do something with it is obviously better.
That's
now,
right.
I left this in the screenshot, Ryan, to make this point. That first one there, it says failed. That failed because the audience wasn't big enough.
Yep.
So yeah, the audience needs to be 2K minimum. I mean, that's pretty small still for like DSP, but like that one there failed because we were in, I think, too narrow of a time range or got too restrictive with what we were looking for. But there's no penalty for incurring like a failure like that. It's fine.
Right. You just have to be aware of it. If it keeps failing, that's probably why. Yeah, it's not big enough.
Right.
And you should loosen up those constraints or open up your date range to include more people. I
think the date range is what probably did it for us. And here we go, business growth. So shifting back into agency, putting my agency hat back on, how does AMC help us with growing an agency, growing a business? So there's a couple things. First one, we feel like we're more comfortable advocating and justifying suggested budget increases for Amazon DSP because now we have some clear evidence that ties the whole sequence of events together. This was, like I said, the missing link previously. Now we feel like we have it. And now we can say this is the impact that Amazon DSP actually has. And since we know that, we can increase budget for it. And that usually means that you as an agency would get more revenue from managing a larger budget. That's pretty normal, especially with the way the way DSP works, which is like that percentage-based model built into it. But if you can really demonstrate to clients, like, here is what's going on, really, we have the data now, we can show this to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. There you go. That's business growth right there.
Yeah.
Another one, my second case, is this, like, how do you think of yourself as an agency? Are you a service provider or are you a data provider? Are you both? Are you one or the other? So could offering interpretation or insights and actions that can be taken as a result of AMC data that you have in-house figured out and built the team around and have like the resources to understand and interpret, could that be a line of business for you? Could you be like a data interpretation department for a company or a brand that needs that? And actually these insights and then the recommendations for action that follow on from them could be very valuable. Like something that they definitely would be willing to pay an agency for if the insights were that good. The only thing I'll caution, I put a little like warning sign, AMC for like a lot of clients, I know for our clients, it's not something that we necessarily have like in scope. Here's a quote for our services. Here's what we offer. AMC was not something we had on there like 2-3 years ago when we signed them, right? So you have to understand how that agency client relationship is going to work because AMC is relatively speaking quite new. And even though it's been out for more than a year, adoption is still quite, low, I would say, generally speaking, because of the complexities that we've talked about. So just keep that in mind too. But this is a question I've started to ask myself is like, who are we? Are we a service provider or a data provider? Both. An interesting area for potential expansion.
Yeah, it is very interesting, right? With the Amazon releasing this tool and the complexities behind it, I think their intentions were obviously very great, which is to help us answer all of those business questions. How does ADSP help sponsored ads? But what they didn't necessarily provide was an easy way for agencies and brand owners themselves to access that data. And so it does leave this little gap in terms of how you should be using AMC. But for the brands who are on the call too, the takeaway that I would like to suggest is there's been a lot of stigma associated with DSP, and you might have tested it in the past. And Brent alluded to several of these changes already, but DSP's evolved tremendously in the last 2 or 3 years, and it continues to evolve and get better. And so, if you've been hesitant to try it, or if you've had poor experiences in the past, certainly now that AMC exists, there's no reason why you shouldn't go back and try DSP again. Don't think of it like, I'm not spending on DSP now, I'll never spend on DSP, so I'm never going to use AMC. I think AMC really should be encouraging you to go back and look at all of the things that you might be missing if you're not running DSP, or maybe you should be spending more money there. There's a lot of very cool and exciting features and things that DSP allows you to do that you can't do with sponsored ads.
Yeah, usually it's the question of finely tuning targeting that you just don't have access to.
Exactly. Finely tuning targeting and even getting exposure to new upper funnel ad types like streaming TV, although now that is available in sponsored ads as well.
Yeah, well, Ryan, if you said that, if you said that like a week ago, it wouldn't have been the case. But Amazon moves fast, so yeah, I was reading about that just today. Indeed, like sponsored display is kind of the little brother of DSP, and you could say that sponsored TV is kind of the little brother of some aspects of DSP as well. That's right. So, what are some next steps? These are some like more concrete, actionable things to take away if you are an agency or service provider. So, are you actively spending with DSP for a client? Well, if so, my suggestion to you is go get an AMC instance started up immediately. Why do it immediately? Because data collection starts from 7 days from when the instance goes live, and then it's a rolling 13-month period. So even if you're not really like, oh, I got to use AMC tomorrow, well, maybe you can get it going, and then 3 months from now, you'll have some data, and you can go back to it and say, okay, now we're ready to do it. We captured all this information over the Q4 period. That was very beneficial. It's February now. Let's go ahead and run some queries and figure this out. How to actually do that, I think you can talk to your Amazon rep to request it, or you can work with third parties like Intentwise, of course, which is who we've used to request access to AMC. As far as I'm aware, Ryan, it is free to have access to AMC. I don't think you pay anything. You just need to have DSP spend rolling. I would suggest a minimum of probably, $10K a month USD would probably be the very minimum, I would say, in order to say we can pull some interesting insights out of AMC with DSP.
Yeah, definitely want to have some spend for the insights to be interesting. But in terms of getting access, the limitation is pretty easy. As long as you have a DSP, what's called a CFID, it's just essentially your advertiser ID. So if you have a DSP account, even if you're spending very low amount of money there, you can request your AMC instance to be created. And there's no cost to having an AMC instance. And if you work with Intentwise, you can fill out a form on our website to suggest or ask us to go get that instance created for you, and we don't charge for that service either. So we're in the business of making sure that everyone who's eligible for an AMC instance gets one, for all of the reasons that you've mentioned above, Brent. It's important that you do that as soon as possible.
Okay, cool. And I know that they've also been faster with it too. I remember when we requested one last year, we didn't get it for a while because one of the people on the AMC team was actually on holiday. So he just didn't get back in the office. Like the team was that small. I don't know where it sits now, but I imagine it's faster. In my experience, it's been faster.
It's much faster now, yeah. And we have a very good working relationship with the AMC team at Amazon. So if you contact Intentwise for help getting it set up, it should be very quick.
Okay, fantastic to hear that. And then more agency talk here, but assign, in my opinion, assign at least one person to be your internal AMC expert, your internal AMC guru. We have one person who's doing that and another person who's kind of like leveling up. So we're trying to get 2 people in there. And there's a bunch of ways to learn. Amazon has the Learning Console certifications. The main one that's for AMC, that's like the big one, is actually quite difficult. This is not one of the ones where you just can click through and say like answer. I got a 95%. I'm a genius. This takes like time and effort and energy, and you're writing SQL queries and you're being asked hard questions. So that's a good start. Online training. I know Intentwise, you guys have an SQL training thing on your website for a while. I think that's probably still there, but you can Google around how to do any kind of SQL stuff. Webinars like this one and other ones from Intentwise and maybe others out there. And of course, direct experience. Nothing like direct experience you can begin with instructional queries and templates and work your way up from there. It's really like a ladder situation or a crawl, walk, run type situation with this. This is not something you can just wrap your head around immediately unless you're some kind of SQL like mastermind genius.
Yeah. I love the last point you have there, Brent. I think a lot of brands in particular are just very cautious when it comes to exploring AMC, and certainly when they hear how complex it is and all the technical challenges, it might scare you away. Amazon does have a great library of instructional queries. And when you log into AMC, you can search through those queries. Yes, they're not going to be super specific to your business. They are going to be high level, but I highly recommend you play around a little bit, take some of those instructional queries, you just copy and paste them directly into the query editor and see for yourself how the whole process works. Maybe you can read through that query and see if you can make sense of how Amazon has structured it, what the output looks like, and how you might visualize that. But there's certainly nothing that you'll mess up by taking some of those instructional queries and running them yourself in AMC.
Yeah, that's great. And those instructional queries, they have comments on them too. So there's even like some editorial provided because there's a commenting system on SQL. Like there's a lot of programming languages. You can see what the thinking is behind it, what the structure is by the actual commenting too.
Exactly.
And last one, I added this one actually earlier today because I was reading about this. So I thought, I'll stick this in here. Final thoughts, like Amazon announced something called Sandbox AMC environment at Unbox like last week. And this is basically like a place where you can run queries, and it's querying a smaller database. So they run fast and you can get like information out of that quickly. This is my understanding of it. And they also have something called template analytics. And one of the few places I found information about this is actually on a guy's LinkedIn. I think he's the guy at Amazon who's actually responsible for maybe shipping this. But basically this template analytics, as I understand it, and Ryan, I learned about this just today, is basically these instructional queries, but like with a bit more detail to them, as I understand it. So if you're in the editor for AMC, you can see there's a new beta tab that says template analytics.
Yeah. And they're trying to make it, again, Amazon's trying to make this a lot more accessible to brands and agencies who maybe don't have these skills internally. So template analytics is a step in that direction, which is to take 5 of the most commonly used queries and make them just even easier to run without having those SQL skills. So you still have to do it manually, and there's other things that have not changed, but it's good to see that Amazon is continuing to make this more and more accessible to brands who don't have maybe those skills in-house.
Much to learn, and new stuff coming all the time with AMC. I mean, it's changed so much in the year that I've been following it. So
seriously, yeah, AMC's been out for I think what, two years now, maybe even 3. But it's really starting to take shape now, I think, as more people are starting to adopt the platform and understand how it works and all the nuances. So it's been a very exciting journey. Brent, we have one question from the group so far, and to the rest of our attendees, if you have questions, please utilize the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen to send them our way. This question's from Stacy. When excluding an audience in DSP, does it exclude them only from DSP ads or also from other ad types like sponsored products and sponsored display?
Oh, that's a cool question. No, it only excludes them from DSP. So if you have a what's called an order and a line item, an order is like a campaign and a line item is like an ad group in DSP, you can say, here's this audience, let's exclude it from this order. And so we're not targeting those people in these DSP efforts. Unfortunately, doesn't extend to sponsored ads. I mean, if I had a request for Amazon, hopefully they're listening, please give us shared negative keyword lists inside of sponsored ads. That would be my first request. What we're talking about here, your question was way more advanced and very insightful, but we don't have that ability. No, I wish. That'd be super cool.
That would be cool. Shared negative keyword lists. I like that idea. I'm going to write that down. Brent, one more question for you. This is a bit of a more high level one. So a lot of people might say or listen to this webinar and say, these insights from AMC are great, but I only need to pull this one time. Or, how is this really going to change the way that I operate my business? What would you say to people who aren't convinced in terms of the insights that AMC has to offer?
Yeah, I think that when these platforms come about from Amazon, it's best to get in early and learn it and get comfortable with it, especially if there's no cost associated with this. If you're already running DSP and you have a CFID, like you mentioned, and become fluent, or at least conversationally fluent in it, such that when the time arises when you do need it, you'll be able to call on it more quickly instead of having to scramble to get after it at that time. I think that would be my advice. Like that's what I would tell a big enough brand that has the ability to do it, or an agency that's thinking about it. There's no reason to do it except for like, resource costs in terms of team time and energy. But with the tools that are out there, and as they make it more and more accessible, it's not that hard of a thing to do. I remember last year when we first started messing around with this, it felt like moving heaven and earth. It was like really quite difficult. And now it's much more simpler.
Yeah. And as it becomes simpler, more and more people will begin to use it. And the competitive advantage to being first is going to become less and less significant. So it's a good point.
That's also true. I would guess there's a very small percentage of people, advertisers, brands, whatever they are, that are actually using this to any real impact or effect right now. It's got to be single digit percentages right now. It's got to be super low. So now's the time.
Awesome. Brent, do you have any other parting words? I think we're all good with questions. Anything else that you'd like to say to close this out?
No, nothing in particular. It's been a pleasure kind of exploring these ideas with you, and I hope this is super beneficial for anyone, whether they be a brand or an agency who watches it now or in replay later. So I hope they get a lot out of it.
Definitely. I certainly got a lot out of it. Thank you so much, Brent, for taking the time to prepare this presentation and meet with us for an hour. If anybody has follow-up questions for Brent, his contact info is on the screen, brent@amzpathfinder.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn. And of course, if you have questions for Intentwise, you can reach out on our website. This recording will be shared early next week. So if you want to pass it on to other members of your team who are responsible for AMC, please go ahead and do that. And don't forget to subscribe to Intentwise newsletter and be the first to hear about our upcoming webinars. Thanks again, Brent. So good to see you. And we'll go ahead and end this webinar.
Thanks, Ryan.